One.
Well, this class is very simple in what we'll be doing and what I'll be asking you to do. It really only has two objectives. The first is to develop our ability to identify arguments, and that means not only identifying what is and isn't an argument, but when we look at an argument, to be able to outline it so that we clearly identify its premises and conclusion. So that's step one, is being able to identify in a piece of argumentative writing just what the argument is. Step two is to evaluate arguments, which is a much trickier thing. I mean, it's not easy, frankly, in a real argument, the way that arguments are presented typically in books and newspapers, so on. It's not easy to outline an argument. It's not easy to really identify what is being presented as the main conclusion and what is being presented as the support premises for that conclusion. Things can get very complex, but there's a method for doing it, and but when it comes to evaluating arguments, the strength of arguments, the soundness of arguments, once we get away from deductive logic, and we're not doing deductive logic, it's a matter of judgment. So something that takes practice and something you have to develop a skill as a reader. But we're going to start with just identifying arguments, and that means identifying premises and conclusions. And it's good to start with short, simple arguments. None of these arguments that I'm going to look at in this video are necessarily good arguments, and that's really not the point here. The point is not to ask whether an argument is good. We start out by asking just what the argument is. So here are some short arguments, and let's read through them, and let's just practice identifying what their conclusion is and what their premises are. Charlton Heston was history's greatest actor, since he starred in the greatest movie of all time, Planet of the Apes, and was also a very convincing Mark Antony in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Okay, little argument there. Definitely an argument. Okay, I'm a big Charlton Heston fan, but you don't even have to know who he is. Okay, so how do we begin to analyze this argument, to break it down into its component parts? Okay, so one of the things that's always good, and this is what all the critical thinking textbooks tell you to do, and it's not bad advice, is to look for inference indicators. And we see one right away in this piece here, since. Since is an inference indicator, and it's a premise indicator. So what it indicates is that what follows is a premise for a conclusion. So we have a statement here. He starred in one of the greatest movies, or he starred in the greatest movie of all time, Planet of the Apes, is a premise. Okay, so at least we know that, okay, this is a premise here. But otherwise, there are no inference indicators here. Right? You just have to sort of get the sense of it. But the since tells us that what follows here is definitely not going to be the conclusion, right? It's going to be a premise. So we have to decide what is the conclusion? What is the main conclusion here? We'll be talking about intermediate conclusions later, because we'll have to get to more complex arguments. But thankfully, there's only one conclusion here, a main conclusion. What is this little piece of writing meant to establish? Well, clearly, it's meant to establish this. It's not a very good argument, but that's not the point. But Charlton Heston was history's greatest actor. And there are reasons given for that. There are actually two. The since tells us that what follows are premises that support this conclusion. The first premise, he starred in the greatest movie of all time, Planet of the Apes, is one premise. And the other one is that he was a very convincing Mark Antony in a movie version, actually, of Julius Caesar. Okay, this is just in a very simple way, this is just what we do, right? We're looking for looking to identify arguments, and then every argument has premises and conclusion. And here is the conclusion, and the other two statements act as premises. Here's another very simple argument. Before I started exercising, I felt tired all the time. I also had bad digestion and had mysterious aches and pains. Therefore, exercise improves health. Okay. Again, it's a very informal argument, maybe not even a great argument. It's not meant to be, right? But right here, we're just practicing the identification of arguments. And again, looking for inference indicators, we find a big one right here, the therefore. The therefore is an inference indicator. More specifically, it is a conclusion indicator. And it's your best friend in a way, the therefore. It just lays out that what follows is the point, the conclusion, that exercise improves health. So clearly what this little argument is trying to do is to establish this. And here are our premises: that before I started exercising, I felt tired all the time. And the premise also that the implication being before I started exercising, I also had bad digestion and mysterious aches and pains. So we have really three premises if we're going to write them out. And we'll begin to do that. We'll begin to put arguments in standard form. Here's an argument that's maybe a little bit more complex. The causes of the American Civil War are complex and many, but it is clear that at bottom it was a result of the compromises made during the adoption of the Constitution. The clauses introduced to appease the Southern states gave them disproportionate power, which was bound to eventually provoke the North into confrontation. It's not as clear, not as simple an argument, maybe not even as clear an argument. And it's the kind of thing where we have to sort of read it over and make interpretive decisions about what the point is. It's filled with statements, and every statement is potentially a conclusion, but we have to read it for sense and sort of decide for ourselves what the conclusion is, what the little piece of writing is meant to establish. It starts out with a statement that the causes of the American Civil War are complex and many. That could be its conclusion, but then we have to read the rest of it and say, well, are reasons given to support the claim that the causes of the Civil War are complex and many? What we decide, if we read the rest of it, is that that's not the case. That really, if we look at the argument as a whole, that this is what's being argued for. This is actually our conclusion. Because if you look at the statements here, the clauses of the Constitution introduced to appease the Southern states gave them disproportionate power, and that was bound to eventually provoke the North into confrontation. That directly relates to this here. So really, we have an argument here that the main cause of the American Civil War were the compromises made during the adoption of the American Constitution. So again, that's a sign that it's not like an exact science, right? When we begin to analyze arguments, again, this is not deductive formal logic. This is informal logic, where we look at the arguments that people offer in ordinary writing and speech. There's another argument. Real estate prices in major American cities have gone up significantly since the economic crisis of 2008. However, no rise in urban land prices in American history has lasted more than 5 years. It is inevitable that prices will either level off or drop in the next year or two. Again, not absolutely clear. There's no inference indicators here at all. But if you read it for sense, it becomes clear that this here is the conclusion to the argument, and the rest of it is meant to support.